Um, just actually, we've just got a couple of more questions coming in, Jamie, so I might just keep asking them while they're coming in. What are your thoughts on the senior production manager role being offshore? Perfect question, because that was my next one. Offshore versus onshore senior production manager.
Look, the same thing really applies. People are happy to go to our website now, and we've actually got Team Paul there now. There is a video actually on this, Brent, and I can't remember what the video is, but so we've had Danita, who's been with us 5 years next month, and she's our senior production manager, and she's based in the Philippines. So there's a classic video in the Wize Vault where I interview Paul, who's the senior client manager. And at the time, just be mindful, I think we've called Danita a team leader, but obviously that's senior production manager. So yes, that certainly can work. And the senior production manager in the Philippines, she reviews, the work of, I think, there's the other accountants and even the bookkeeper as well. So yes, that can work, but it comes back to how good they are technically, and all the things that we've already spoken about. So yes, quite possible. And I think we've actually got two senior production managers that have been with us, quite some time. So five years is a long time in terms of educating and having that one-on-one time with their senior client manager over 5 years. You certainly pick up a lot in that time. Yeah.
A question from Liz, Jamie. We hired a senior production manager 5 weeks ago and are now ready to start training them up to do reviewing. Would there be any process or suggested process to training them up? And who is meant to review the job when it comes in and out and send queries out?
Yeah, so couple of questions there, Brenton. In terms of training the senior production manager, it should be the senior client manager. So hopefully, they've got 80%, Liz, of the skills that you need, and the senior client manager may only need to fill in, 5, 10, hopefully a maximum of 20% of what they're missing. And part of that process, Liz, is you should make sure that the senior production manager has got their checklist in terms of when jobs are presented to the senior production manager. They should be aware of what they need to check. Now, that would include, are the working papers done in your firm done correctly? A lot of the times what you'll find is sometimes the junior staff really want to get the job done quickly, and they'll have it done, and they'll pass it to the senior production manager. And a lot of the working papers may not be done, or there might be shortcuts made. So it's important that you have your systems and processes in place around the checklist. Like even the simple BAS, have these particular accounts been reconciled? Even the integrated client account, are they reconciled? And so you've got to have your checklists. There's no doubt about that. There's actually some of those checklists, Liz, in the Wize Vault in there to look at as well, and I can direct you to those. The other part of that question was, I think, what was it, Brenton?
Who's meant to review the job and also send queries out? So you've covered the job review part, but then also sending queries out to the client.
It's a good question. Yeah. So if there's queries around the production side of it, what should happen is you should have your daily huddle, right? And then what are you stuck on should come up. And the senior production manager will say, well, you know what? I'm stuck on these 3 jobs because of X, Y, and Z. Then the senior production manager should have touch base with the senior client manager, because often the senior client manager is communicating with the client all the time, and from time to time throughout the year, or they've bought a rental property, whatever. And so the senior client manager will often know the answer, Brenton. Okay, but that should filter out via the daily huddle. If the senior client manager doesn't know, often what we will get to do, we'll actually get the senior production manager to draft the email, right, that for the senior client manager or the assistant client manager to go to the client. So they'll do all the hack work. They'll do 95% of it and draft the email and say, "Dear Joe, we need this X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah." They'll send that email to the client manager and they'll shoot it out. So again, you get leverage. In some cases where our senior production manager, even Danita, for example, we had her in Australia and she met some of the clients. Now, she got to a point where she was so good that she would email the clients for the production work, not communication traffic, but for the production work, and she would CC the client manager on the queries.
Okay.
So again, that's leverage, and the client would just say, "Yes, well, this is what you need to do the job." So
Great.
hopefully that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, Liz has come back and said, "Great, thanks." So I think we've covered that one for her. Craig, I'm going to ask your question in a second, and same with yours as well, Chelsea. I'm just going to cover off on job description. We'll get to those two questions. So, Jamie, take us through some of these finer points, and I'll premise this with we've taken these points directly from the templates that we've got in the Wize Vault in step number 5. So everything we're speaking about today, everything that Jamie's mentioned today, is in step number 5 in the Vault. But for a full position description, you can download that straight from step 5. I think it's step 5.1. But talk to us a little bit about some of the points of the job description, of which we've covered a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, so we've probably covered a lot of those things, and everyone can have a quick read of themselves. What I'll probably cover on is down there, the last point. Will not be required to see clients face to face. Occasionally, we'll be asked to help the manager with, So what you want, you often want the senior production manager, because of their skills and knowledge, you might want them to help you as the senior client manager to prepare for, an annual general meeting or a strategic meeting. You might even want them to help you with software selection. Sometimes a senior production manager will have a lot of knowledge around software, as a couple of ours do. And even if you are doing some of that advisory type work or virtual CFO work, it's great to have the senior production manager helping prepare the figures. For example, if you're having a monthly meeting or a quarterly catch up in a board meeting environment, it's really good that the senior client manager can walk into that meeting and have all the figures done, and have all the figures done and be able to review them a day before the meeting. And even strategic tax planning and structuring advice. It's good to work as a team, because often a fish can't see water. And, it'd be good as a senior client manager or the assistant client manager go to the senior production manager. Hey, Joe, what do you think? What do you think of this type of advice or structure? And often the senior production, and you might say, oh well, we could do this, we could do a bucket company or something. So again, it's just working in that team and utilizing their knowledge, utilizing their skill to get the best outcome for the client. Okay. Some of the other points we've probably touched on a lot there.
Yeah, but I think a lot of those points we have touched on. I think one of the main things we wanted to point out with this is there's two very really helpful resources in the Vault. One of which is a very detailed position description, which covers off a lot of the things that we've discussed today, which you can use in that recruitment process and onboarding process of your senior production manager. The second part of it is actually the performance appraisal or the performance review template. And I can even vouch for this actually with the senior production manager we have in the firm here. Wanted to do a 6-month review with her a couple of weeks ago, Jamie, and just went straight to the Wize Vault, downloaded that template, and it actually formed the basis of such a good conversation and really made her feel valued in terms of the structure and the format of that performance review template. So highly recommend. We've got one of those templates for each of the job roles in the ideal team structure, but if you want to have a closer look at that, definitely recommend it. All right. Before I get to KPIs, I'm just going to ask you a couple of the other questions that have come through from Craig. What do you see as the next step for a senior production manager in terms of career progression, Jamie?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had that one before too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, the answer to that is um, if you've found someone who you've put into the role as a senior production manager, right, and they're really ambitious, and they've got quite, they've probably got interpersonal skills that may not be there. But what can happen is you can find someone who is really ambitious, and they know in their mind that they actually want to be a senior client manager. Now, you've got to be careful with that, because that type of person, if you don't promote that type of person, then you can lose them. So another way of saying it is, if you put, say, a finder in a grinder or minder's role forever, and they really want to be a finder, that's when you have the risk of losing them. So that's the first answer. The next part of the answer, what the solution is the question is, why do people leave their jobs? And they tend to leave their jobs because of two reasons. One, most people leave their jobs because they're disengaged and they don't like their manager. The second reason they leave their job is because they're not in their flow. And when you're not in your flow, you're just not happy. And if you're not happy, you'll tend to leave. So if you can find the personality type in terms of the DNA that is happy in that role, then they won't want to be promoted to a senior client manager. So if you think about the promotion path, what is the promotion path? Well, you know what, you could go to an assistant client manager, then you could go to a senior client manager. So that's the career path, but that's not for everyone. And Ed often tells a story where he had a particular accountant. I think he mentioned this, Brent, in one of the other clinics, but they were a senior production manager or a senior accountant, you might recall, and they kept saying to Ed, "I want to be a senior client manager." Anyhow, they became a senior client manager, and Ed found out the only reason. Now, this is a really important point. The only reason that they wanted to be a senior client manager was because of the salary. They thought that their salary, would be higher because of that role. It turns out she did that role, and that particular person wasn't happy in that role because they just didn't have the DNA for it. And so if you incorrectly promote people, you just set them up for a fall. And you'll notice that by the fact that they won't win clients, they won't be able to keep clients, and all the statistics around when you manage this, you'll see the statistics come through. You'll see the stats come through. So it's important that people understand what their flow is. It's important for you as the leader to understand what their best and highest contribution is. And it may not always be a senior production manager, a senior client manager. They might be best suited to a senior production manager, because that's working in their flow where they'll be most happy. And they probably don't like working with hundreds of different people. Some people hate people, not
Yeah,
hate
it's an interesting point,
them,
and
but
I've heard.
they don't like dealing with people.
As you mentioned there, Ed's recalled that story a number of times in the past in terms of that person being really unhappy in that senior client manager role once they understood what the role entailed. And then when he understood the attachment to the want to be in that role was to increase salary, well, then they had the conversation, well, how do we increase your salary being in that senior production manager role, and basically came to a conclusion that worked for both of them on that. So Craig, I'd suggest, given that Ed's not here, you might want to ask that question again in the Wize Tribe to get his version of that story again.
That's
I'm
right.
sure he'd love to tell you. Now guys, just mindful of time, I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll just cover off on KPIs, and then there's a few more questions that we'd like to get through. So Jamie, an important one, keeping the senior production manager accountable to their role. What are the main KPIs we should be focused on? And if you can give a bit of a gauge as to what the benchmarks might look like.
Yeah, well, in terms of productivity, obviously, in the Wize philosophy, whether you a time billing model, whether you've got fixed price agreements or whatever it is, you still should do timesheets for internal management. There's been some firms that have joined us that I've spoken to, and they haven't kept timesheets, for example. We're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into that debate now, but certainly you can't look at a productivity level without keeping timesheets. So with a productivity percentage of a senior production manager, look at anywhere from about 70% to 80, 85%, 70, around that gauge. And the reason is they still, if you've got a full team of 700,000 and scaling to $1 million, the senior production manager still has to manage that team, and that will still take time. It's different that if you're just sitting there yourself and just solely focused on production work day in, day out. You won't be. You'll be actually helping, guiding, coordinating the work. So around 70, 80% with their productivity percentage. The other one that you can have a look at, and we use, as a shout out, we use XPM. So your time tracking system, we use XPN linked with a different system with some guys from New Zealand called Link Reporting. So you should look at your net billable hours after write-offs. And that should then sort of tie in your capacity plan. If you've had a look at step 7, everyone, in terms of the capacity plan, which shows you, productivity, charge out rates, which are then based on the gross profit, a factor of the person's salary, so forth and so forth. Then you've got your capacity plan as the goal, and then you should have a look at your net billable hours. Now we say net billable after write-offs because anyone can load their timesheet up to 100%, but that doesn't mean it's recoverable. So every time you have a write-off, it affects your gross profit. The next point there is, technically correct, and so you don't want the senior production manager to have really low or sloppy technical skills, because what's going to happen is all that production traffic will hit the senior client manager's face. You don't want that. So they've got to have a level of technical proficiency for sure. The other point there is they need to be able to manage people. So not, you need to be able to train and support the production team. So they've still got to have a level of ability to work with people in a team environment. But again, that's not for everyone. So you need to tease that out to make sure that they're doing that. And the final one there is like really just preparing, just being aware of directing the team to do the jobs in the budgeted hours. Do the jobs in the timeframes, and you can help guide and lead the production team around that with systems like Carbon, for example. So budgeted hours. So if you can do the jobs in the budgeted hours and or do it under that, then fantastic. So they're the type of things that should be measuring.
Yeah, and just I guess to touch on point 4 there, just coming to mind, as a metric that could be managed there is the net promoter score of that person's team. I'm assuming, Jamie. Yeah.
Yeah, internally it is. That's right. So another one is the net promoter score, which sort of reflects the overall. What we've got to be clear is, Brenton, is the senior client manager is still responsible for the entire team.
Okay.
And I've said it before. Yeah, I've said it before in the Wize Vault. There's been questions around this that, is the senior production manager like doing the performance reviews of the accountants and bookkeepers? Well, the answer is no, but the senior client manager can certainly have the senior production manager sitting in the interviews on the performance appraisals. Now, whether they're quarterly, 6 monthly, yearly, particularly with the production staff, the senior production manager can be there and helping with the performance review. But someone, which is the senior client manager, is responsible for that entire team, and the net promoter score often reflects that entire team as well.
Perfect. So Jamie, we've got 2 minutes to go, so I'm going to do some quick fire questions at you. So be mindful of the time if you don't mind. But and you may have covered this one already from Chelsea, just in terms of the KPIs. As you're starting to scale, what are your recommendations between the billable hours to reviewing work of a senior production manager?
Yeah, so with a, say, senior bookkeeper or senior accountant, their productivity is more like about 90%, Brenton. Soon as you put someone else in charge of someone else, and we've been through all this, you've got to make allowance for that. We just had a new accountant that we hired, and we had one particular person. We said, look, we need you to be their buddy, but also put you in charge of their learning and education development. So we knew there was going to be a lot of that. So you can therefore reduce their productivity or leave it at the level, but make sure that as the senior client manager, that you're aware of that factor, because you don't want to come out hard and fast and not recognize the fact that they're managing someone. So the answer to that is, you certainly could drop their productivity, Chelsea, to allow for the fact they're going to manage people. And when those people are being managed, it means that you don't have to do it. So, so, but certainly most of the grinding staff, production staff who aren't managing, ours are all set at around 90%. But as soon as they move to that management level, you need to look at dropping that product.